Hey everyone, Erick Stakelbeck here. Today on the newscast, the war drums continue as the Iranian regime marks the one-year anniversary of the death of its terror master, Qassem Soleimani. We've got some major new developments for you on that front. Stick around. Hey folks, Erick Stakelbeck here. Welcome to the Watchman newscast. Well, the one-year anniversary of the death of Qassem Soleimani has come and gone without major incident, but we are not out of the woods yet. Since we last came to you on Saturday, January 2nd with a Watchman newscast update, we've had at least seven, count them folks, seven major developments out of the Middle East that you're just not hearing about in the mainstream media, but which are very important for you no matter where you live. The Middle East never sleeps, even during the holiday season. Major developments are unfolding in the world's most chaotic and strategic region that you need to know about. So hey, be sure to subscribe to the Watchman News channel right here on YouTube and click the notification bell so you get alerts every time a new video is posted. Okay, let's get into it. January 3rd, 2021 was the date that we all had circled on our calendars. The one-year anniversary of the U.S. drone takeout of Iran's terror master, the architect of their terror strategy throughout the Middle East, Qassem Soleimani. Now, we've been reporting to you practically every day over the past 2 weeks or so here on the Watchman newscast that U.S. intelligence and Israeli intelligence officials, not to mention military officials, were very concerned that around that January 3rd date, on or around that January 3rd date, that's one of the reasons I say we're not out of the woods yet, that the Iranian regime would attempt some kind of attack, number one, against U.S. interests in the Middle East, in particular in Iraq, and I'm thinking of the U.S. embassy there in Baghdad. And secondly, the Israelis have been very concerned that the Iranian regime will attempt to retaliate for the death of Mohsen Fakhrizadeh, who was the father of Iran's nuclear weapons program before he was killed on November 27th, not far from the Iranian capital of Tehran. So we have two pieces here, really, the United States piece and the Israel piece, but they pretty much converge because the U.S. and Israel share this common foe in the Iranian regime and its terror proxies. January 3rd, not much happened. Thankfully, thank God, right? What we did have were rallies in Baghdad yesterday by Iranian allies in and around Baghdad International Airport, where the demise of Qassem Soleimani and some other Iran-aligned terrorists took place 1 year ago at the hands of that U.S. drone strike. So you had the rallies, the protests in support of the Iranian regime in Baghdad. But other than that, a pretty quiet day in terms of on the physical front, terror and warfare and rockets. Thank God we did not see any of that. But some major statements that you need to know about. Now, back up 2 days to Friday, January 1st, New Year's Day. We talked about this on our Saturday newscast. You can check it out in our archives here on YouTube. Top Iranian officials spoke at this rally commemorating the death of Soleimani. And one of them, the head of Iran's judiciary, a very powerful figure in that Iranian regime, directly threatened President Trump and said that he is, quote, not safe on this earth. That was kind of a big deal, folks, in my view, to have a direct threat against the American president from a top Iranian regime official. Very interesting development on the Israel-U.S. front. And when we talk about the Israel-U.S. alliance really never being stronger than it is right now under President Trump, we had Israel supply the United States just yesterday with 2 Iron Dome missile defense batteries. Now, we've talked about the Iron Dome missile defense system here and David Sling and Israel's other missile defense capabilities. Iron Dome has been highly effective in shooting down, in particular, those Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad rockets out of Gaza over the past several years. Well, they have supplied 2 of these Iron Dome batteries to the United States, presumably to be used in Iraq. We've talked so much, right, on recent newscasts about the Iranian regime and its proxies in Iraq potentially targeting the U.S. embassy and U.S. soldiers in Iraq. So could these Iron Dome batteries shoot these rockets out of the sky? Many of them, just 2 weeks ago, we had at least 21 rockets fired at the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad in one day alone. So it seems like the Iron Dome missile defense batteries are a natural fit in terms of stopping these rocket volleys for the United States. So that was a major bit of news. Also, we've been monitoring for you, again, as these war drums continue, right? The show of force and the message that the U.S. military has been sending to the Iranian regime. We had the U.S. nuclear submarine sail through the Strait of Hormuz there, right at the mouth of the Persian Gulf, that strategic waterway where some 20% of the world's oil supply passes through every day. More on that in a second. We have a major development there, by the way. But we had the nuclear submarine. We had U.S. B-52 bombers on at least 3 occasions in the past 2 months or so, flying low over the Persian Gulf, again sending that message. Now, U.S. Defense Secretary Christopher Miller announced just last night, Sunday, January 3rd, that the USS Nimitz, a U.S. aircraft carrier which has been in the Persian Gulf for the past several weeks, it was scheduled to redeploy, I believe, back to the United States. Now, Christopher Miller announced last night that the Nimitz, that U.S. aircraft carrier, will remain in the Persian Gulf. And Miller gave the reason why. He said because of Iran's threats, the threats of the Iranian regime, particularly centered around the death of Soleimani, these revenge attacks that Iran is vowing, we're going to have that U.S. aircraft carrier stay in the Persian Gulf until further notice. Once again, a message sent, and the U.S. kind of flexing its military might and telling the Iranian regime, don't even think about it. So you have the interesting synergy between the U.S. and Israel, of course, and you've got the U.S. and Israel, by the way, with these shows of force. Hey, Israeli officials have not only said over the past few weeks to Iran, in terms of Fakhrizadeh's death, don't even try it, don't try some kind of revenge attack, but we also had an Israeli submarine recently travel into the Persian Gulf and surface in plain sight of the Iranian regime. Here's what Iran is saying as we shift a bit to that Israel piece. We've got the U.S. piece and the Israel piece, and obviously they converge, but let's focus on Israel for a second now that we've talked about the U.S. and the latest there. I'm going to read this directly from my phone because, again, folks, I do not want to misquote these Iranian officials. I said it on Saturday, I'll say it again. When evil men tell you they want to kill you, you should take them very seriously and take them at their word. If history shows us anything, it shows us that. So, the Times of Israel has a great translation of a major speech given on Saturday, January 2nd, by a top Iranian Revolutionary Guards Corps official. Now, we've talked about this on previous newscasts. The Iranian Revolutionary Guards Corps are really the vanguard of that Iranian regime. They answered directly to Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei. Think of the Gestapo under the Nazi regime, and you have an idea of the Revolutionary Guards Corps, but with much more influence in terms of the military sphere of things, and they are the vanguards also of Iran's nuclear program. So, major statement over the weekend by this top Iranian Revolutionary Guards General Amir Ali Hajizadeh from the Iranian Revolutionary Guards Corps said, and I quote, "All the missile capabilities of Gaza and Lebanon have been supported by Iran, and they are the front line for confrontation." He said that the capabilities of the, quote, resistance axis are much more advanced than what they were 10 years ago, and we know that very well. And he went on to say, very importantly, most importantly, and again, follow these words closely, folks, and take them in. He said, we have a general order from the guide, Ayatollah Khamenei, to level Haifa and Tel Aviv to the ground in case any, quote, foolishness is committed against Iran. And we have worked over the past few years to be able to do so, to be able to destroy Tel Aviv and Haifa, 2 of the 3 largest cities in Israel. Folks, again, this is not some low-level clerk in an office somewhere in the bowels of an office building in Tehran. This is a top general in the Iranian Revolutionary Guards Corps, the most important entity in that Iranian regime. And he's saying very clearly, number one, that our proxies in Gaza, Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and Lebanon, which would be Hezbollah, have the capabilities to really put a hurting on Israel, number one. And number two, he's saying we have direct orders from the leader of Iran, the supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, to level Haifa and Tel Aviv, to essentially raze them to the ground if something breaks out, I guess is what he's saying. So obviously we're keeping a very close eye on that. Now, I mentioned the Strait of Hormuz earlier. Another interesting nugget here to share with you. Again, yesterday, I can't say the 1-year anniversary of the death of Qassem Soleimani was completely uneventful, because also Sunday, January 3rd, we saw the Iranian regime seize an oil tanker that was traveling through the Strait of Hormuz, where again, 20% of the world's oil supply passes through that strategic waterway at the mouth of the Persian Gulf. A South Korean flagged oil tanker was seized by the Iranian regime, something to do with a chemical threat, I guess, to the waters of the Persian Gulf. That's what the regime is claiming, some outlandish claim. But they seized this oil tanker as it was in transit to the United Arab Emirates. Now, I think that's very interesting, because yesterday, once again, I told you we had 7 major developments in the past 2 days alone, right? Also yesterday, the United Arab Emirates, which of course just signed that peace treaty with Israel in September, as part of the Abraham Accords, the UAE announced that it made several arrests of what they called Iranian agents on UAE soil who were, according to UAE officials, planning terror attacks against Israelis in the UAE. Now remember, with the Abraham Accords peace deal, citizens of the UAE and Israel are transiting and traveling freely now from country to country. And the UAE says, hey, obviously these Israelis are targets. The UAE is a stone's throw across the Gulf from Iran. So sadly, these Israelis who are there not only for business, but as tourists as well in the UAE and places like Dubai and Abu Dhabi, they are now targets, and much more convenient targets in terms of proximity, sadly, for the Iranian regime. So the UAE says it rolled up this Iranian terror plot on their soil against Israelis. And did that have something to do with the seizure of this South Korean oil tanker, which was headed to the UAE, the seizure by the Iranian regime? Interesting to see how that plays out. Again, the Iranian regime, their reasoning for taking the South Korean oil tanker, something to do with chemicals, a chemical threat. They should know about chemicals, the very regime that is working to acquire nuclear weapons and has a robust biological and chemical weapons program, so they would know very well about that, I would say. Last thing to close with, speaking of that nuclear weapons program, this just came up today, January 4th. I did tell you the other day that Iran is enriching its uranium now to a 20% clip. It's not very far to take it from 20 to 90%, apparently, according to atomic experts, which means if Iran wants to develop the bomb, a nuclear bomb, they can do so. And it's been estimated they have enough enriched uranium already, if they so choose, to develop 1, maybe even 2 nuclear bombs. So the big takeaway there is that, okay, we knew they were enriching uranium at a greater pace. They broke the news to the IAEA, the UN's Atomic Energy Agency, on Friday, January 1st. What a way to mark the new year, right? But the big nugget there, the big news today on January 4th, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu made a statement about this. He responded and he said, very succinct, he said, this is clear evidence that the Iranian regime has a nuclear weapons program. They are working to develop nuclear weapons. This is clear proof, this new increase in uranium enrichment. And he said very clearly, Israel will not allow Iran to acquire nuclear weapons. So folks, what we have as we move into 2021 is that collision course. The U.S. obviously on one side, Israel, but the Iranian regime. The Iranian regime, number one, declaring they are hell-bent on developing nuclear weapons. They won't say that out loud. They won't say it's for weaponry, but clearly, when you're enriching uranium at those levels, you want the bomb, as Prime Minister Netanyahu laid out today. And number two, we're keeping an eye on 2021 on the situation to Israel's north, Syria in particular, where you have the other collision course. Iran says we're staying in Syria along with Hezbollah and our proxies. Israel says, no way, we won't let you set up a terror base at our northern doorstep. You've already got one in southern Lebanon. We won't let you duplicate that in the Golan Heights in Syria. Collision course 2021. I said to you as the new year dawned, I know all of us want to flip the calendar, obviously, to 2021 and get 2020 out of the way. But folks, I really feel that some of the patterns we've seen develop, at least in the Middle East, will intensify in 2021. So we want to be your go-to source on a regular basis right here on the Watchman Newscast. So be sure to subscribe so you get updates. We'll be posting many more of these videos in the days and weeks to come. Again, bringing you the kind of cutting-edge, timely information that you're just not hearing anywhere else, certainly not in the mainstream media. We're here for you for such a time as this. Thanks for joining us. God bless you. And remember, never hold your peace.